A human being dreads the day that they have to leave their family behind. Because the day that they do is the day where they realize that they have to grow up more than they ever thought that they could. I read that in a book somewhere. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's something that I should have kept in mind before this storm tore everything apart for me. This storm is a metaphor, by the way. I wish that it had just been a storm. Oh, how I wish it had been. Something worse had gripped my small town. Something dark had hit us like a wave, and it spread across until it was consumed. I never knew what it was. Nobody could have grasped it. I doubt that it's something from this earth, or maybe it is. And hell is real. The thing about innocence is that one cannot be innocent forever. Eventually, inevitably, all that innocence succumbs to losing it, and once lost, it can never truly be brought back. I lost mine the day that I lost my mother. What I'm about to tell you is a series of events that transpired that I'm still living with and I'm trying to escape from. It all started with a tragedy. I lived in the small town of Curralewis, a middle-of-nowhere place outside of Tamsworth, Australia. In one of those suburbs where the streets are all simple. One house opposite each other on both sides. Families inhabiting nearly every house, and my place being opposite of perhaps the single loudest dog in the neighborhood. Not like my own dog though. I trained him real good. His name was Spike, and along with my cat Josephine, and they mostly slept throughout the day and demanded food at night. My mom was a doctor working locally up at Gunnedah, a short distance away from here, and my dad was a stay-at-home parent, making sure that I didn't get into too much trouble. He kept the house in shape and always ensured that dinner was served at the very second my mom walked through the door. They were good parents, kind, just, protective, and like any mom and dad should be. I was going into 11th grade, you know, going to college, maybe have a boyfriend. I swear I was so close to my first kiss. Things had been growing increasingly strange in my town before this storm hit. My mom hadn't been seen for 2 days straight, and I wasn't allowed to leave the house, not even for school. Dad insisted that I stay in the bedroom and he wouldn't tell me anything else about what was happening. Heck, the radio was simply static. Only a few stations played the odd song, some on replay as if we were on a loop. The only hint that I was given before Mom had left us was that she had to go to work for an overnight shift while working on an extremely important job. Just one night, not two. Going on 3 days. Wednesday came and I still wasn't allowed to leave home. I wandered downstairs from my bedroom, creeping down the hallway, and I saw Dad sitting by the kitchen table, making phone calls, or at least trying to make some phone calls. He seemed angry and paranoid. Nobody was answering him. Looking out the window of my bedroom, everything seemed normal outside. Honestly, I didn't understand what was going on at the time. I thought that maybe Mom was in some sort of police protection somewhere and that the case was bigger than I had originally been told. Maybe we were in danger. That wasn't the case though. When Dad found me eavesdropping on him, he pulled me over and he looked at me up and down nervously. His eyes were wet and he had a redness to them that looked as if he had been crying. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink since the night Mom had left us. Rachel, sweetie, I don't know what to tell you. Your mom, Michelle, she's gone, Rachel. She's gone. Do you know the feeling where there's an emptiness deep inside your stomach? Churning, twisting. It gnaws and climbs all the way to your brain and it leaves it shaken until you feel it inside your bones and in your heart. That all-encompassing emptiness and numbness intertwined with anxiety that leaves you sick and emotionless because you don't know what to say or what to do that can process the emotions that you meant to be feeling. That hit me like a freight train as soon as the words were spoken left his mouth. I walked out of the room as his tears ran down his face, ran to my room, and I slammed the door behind me, and I drowned the world out with music. I couldn't cry. I couldn't do anything but stare upwards at the ceiling until, eventually, I succumbed to sleep. When the morning came, I stayed up in my room all day. 103 notifications on my phone and I didn't bother with any of it. I can't remember a time before this that I had felt such nothingness engulf me. The thing with nothingness was, if there is a hole, there it must be filled with something. Whatever that something is, whether it be good or bad. 2 days later, and a couple of uneaten dinners laying at my doorstep, I left my bedroom and I went downstairs, only to hear the sounds of banging and seeing one of the kitchen windows completely barred up by wooden boards. In the lounge room, Dad was in there with a hammer and nails putting up boards on the second lounge room window. The first had already been completely covered up. "Dad, what is this? Have you lost it? What are you doing?" I asked him, bewildered at the time by this behavior. I had just heard that my mom had died and all of a sudden he was acting like one of those doomsday preppers you see on TV. "I need you to listen to me. I know how this looks, but I need you to trust me and do as I say, alright? You see that hammer and those nails on the floor? Those are for you, trust me, alright? I need you to start closing off all the windows." He told me. His hands were shaking, his eyes had this fear that I had never seen in them before. "Dad, what?" Even as I spoke those words, he gave me a look that begged for me to try and understand. So I stopped trying to and I left him to be. Picking up the hammer, nails, and wooden planks, I started going around upstairs covering up all the remaining windows that hadn't been covered. When I went to my parents' bedroom, the windows had already been taken care of. Everything was now in the dark. Flipping the switch, I saw on the pillow where Mom used to rest her head, a photo of us all as a family at SeaWorld down on the Gold Coast. Seeing her face, her smile, seeing her hold me from behind brought it all back and I dropped all of the tools. I became a mess of tears, anger and confusion on the bed. I never wanted to scream so hard in my life before, but I let it out and I kept crying, wishing that we were a family again. Angry at how I took it all for granted. Of all the things I should have said to her before she left that night. I wanted to turn back time. Life is cruel, but the one thing that is crueler is time. We never get what we lost back, and we can never make the moments we were truly happy. Those memories last forever. Dad came in and held me tight as I cried in his chest. He caressed my hair and gave me a kiss on the forehead, almost in tears himself. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Rachel." That was all he could muster out of himself before we both fell asleep. The lights remained on throughout the house in order for us to see. Dad only wanted us to use the candles as a last resort if the power decided to go out. He took my cell phone from me and with much hesitation, I agreed to him taking it. As the phone lines eventually went dead and he wanted to use the internet on my phone for whatever reason he still didn't want to discuss with me about. He never was interested in current day phones. All he had was a flip phone. He continued leaving me in the dark about what was going on. Most nights he sat on the couch with a knife in his hand, staring at the window as if he were seeing through it, and looking outside at some unknown enemy. I started losing sleep and not eating well. I'd end up taking Mom's old sleeping pills just to get some kind of rest. Dad kept on deteriorating in front of me, pacing up and down the hallways, both downstairs and upstairs. The kitchen had become a mess of moldy food, stale bread and piles of dishes and stains across the table and benches. He would order me not to go into the basement during certain hours when it was dark as he felt that it was dangerous down there. Whenever I tried talking with him, I would get those same answers, about how we'll be outside soon and that I had to remain patient and aware of any noises by the windows. One night while I was in the shower, the inevitable happened. The power went out. Like a bang, everything went dark and the black was all-consuming, encompassing all things. I remember acting like a scared little girl, anxiety deep within me, reaching out for a towel and wrapping it around me before running out into the hallway, clumsily stumbling around waiting for my eyes to adjust. Candles were lit around the house to keep it illuminated throughout the night. Dad still chose to linger around the lounge, staring outwards at the windows. My words couldn't reach him, even when I tried asking where my phone was or what was happening. There would no longer be any responses. He didn't even blink anymore. He sat there open-eyed, and I retreated back into my room, holding a single candle, wishing for sunrise. I no longer felt safe with him. The following morning I went downstairs. One of the lounge room windows was broken open. Wooden boards and glass laid strewn across the carpet. For the first time since this isolation, I felt the wind blow across my face, and all I could do was close my eyes and breathe it in. Dad was still seated on the couch staring outwards, his face subtly twitching. As I examined him, that's when I realized that he had had blood on his knuckles. Did he break through the window with his bare hands? The next thing I knew, my dad snapped back to life frantically. He looked around the room hurriedly and he sprang back up, running around to the shed before carrying some more boards with a hammer and nails. "There's a hole in the wall! Why is there a hole in the wall?" he screamed, frenetically placing the boards from end to end on the window, trying to build back up the prison that he had made for us. What happened to my dad? Where was the calm, gentle man that had raised me, and that cared for me, the father that I used to know? All I saw before me was this crazed lunatic keeping us trapped here, when I could see nothing outside that screamed danger. In my panic, I grabbed his hand before he could put another nail in, but I was thrown to the ground just as fast. "I'm doing this for us, honey, to protect you. You could already be dead right now as we speak. You wouldn't want Daddy to think you're not his daughter now, would you?" He spoke to me in an unrestrained confusion of emotions, fluctuating between anger, confusion, sadness, and bitterness. It was a contained anger. His eyes had become red, his pupils completely dilated. All I could do was stare in awe at what he had become, before running back to my room and locking the door behind me. I buried my head in my pillow, until suddenly, the door started banging violently. The doorknob twisted and turning as he tried to get in. "Sweetie, sweetie, open up. Daddy just wants to talk to you, okay? He just wants to talk." I stared at the door like he stared at the window, looking outwards at some sort of beast slamming up against the door, hammer in hand. I don't know how it all spiraled into this. Why did he change? How did he become so obsessed with locking us away here? Was it because of Mom? Did her death completely break him? "Go away, Dad. I'm not feeling too well right now, alright? I don't feel like coming out," I responded, trying to sound like my usual self while my eyes betrayed me. The banging came to a halt, and all I could hear were footsteps slowly drifting away from here. Breathing a sigh of relief at the momentary time I had bought for myself. Our dog kept barking for what seemed like hours after he had left me. He kept at it relentlessly without anybody being able to get him to stop. I hadn't seen my cat for 2 days as well. I don't know what had become of Josephine and what had gotten into Spike. After 4 hours had passed, Spike stopped barking and there was this silence. It's the kind of silence that breaks you into two, and your only instinct is screaming at you that something isn't right and you snap. I jolted up and I ran for my drawers, searching for anything sharp that I could use. Grabbing a pair of hair scissors, I gripped onto them tightly with my right hand and I sat in the corner of the room, staring at the door, eyes wide open. The sun set, blanketing the town, this house again in darkness. The subtle light that kept the house illuminated, subtly between the cracks of the boards, vanished, and I was left with only a small pocket flashlight to navigate around with. The candle from the previous night had completely burnt out. Slowly but surely, I unlocked the bedroom door and I peeked out, shining the light down both ends of the hallway until I made sure it was all clear before proceeding out. Every footstep sounded like an air siren in the still quietness that encapsulated the house. It was difficult not to trigger a creaking floorboard moving around the second floor. Heading downstairs, there was a cold chill flooding into the kitchen. Glass met my feet and I almost jumped but caught myself holding onto the bench before looking down to see glass all over the kitchen floor. All of the windows in the kitchen had been broken open. Street lights shine through, all down across to the lounge room where the windows there had been broken too. Spike sat there along the carpet staring outwards towards the windows. Josephine was right next to him, doing exactly what he was doing. Before she started to purr and he responded with a slight growl that rumbled in his throat. I backed away slowly, clutching the scissors in my hands and holding the light downwards away from them, as Spike's growling grew louder and Josephine started to meow alongside him. Moving back down the hallway, I used my left hand to guide me down along the walls, until I reached the door and I went as fast as I could, shutting it gently. I knew that I had gone into the basement, the place that my dad tried to keep me away from. Whatever was going on up there, I had to get away from and escape it. The basement had a small glass window up in the corner that opened up to the side of the house. It would be a tight fit, but I could make it with some effort. It was the only safe exit from the house as far as I was concerned. I quietly treaded down the steps and I kept my light in front of me at all times, examining my surroundings, being careful that I wasn't going to bang into all the miscellaneous junk that was kept down there. I saw the light shimmer in the distance. The window was up ahead, but I would need a chair to be able to reach it and pull myself up, and a cloth to wrap around my hand so I could break it. It was while I was looking around that I felt a hot, wet stickiness on my feet. It's in moments like this where you insert the jump scare, the revelation if you will, the thing to get your heart pumping and the adrenaline surging. You'd be right, but often reality is far more terrifying than a horror movie. Below me was some kind of black slime oozing down the floor, trailing off into the darkness, trailing into the image of a mass which emerged from my flashlight. I felt my legs give way until I was crawling on all fours, holding onto the flashlight and scissors and using my arms and legs to move upwards until I faced it. It wasn't a mass, no. It felt soft, crinkled in some places. There was hair all along it as my hand traced along this almost skin-like texture until I saw it. In amongst this sagging clump of whitened hair was a face, eye sockets empty and staring upwards into me, devoid of all life, of everything. A mouth stretched far open, resembling a giant hole beneath two small ones. It was a face with hair along the top. It was my dad. This was his body, his skin. It was like a snake that had shed. Just a pile of skin on the floor and a black ooze with red mixed amongst it, all trailing off into a nightmare. Before me, illuminated by my flashlight, was the horror that used to be my dad, that had crawled out from the skin. An entangled mess of moving faces, human-like and screaming, hands outstretched across the body, clawed, veiny, dripping wet with the tail draping from behind. It was scaled, black in the head of it. The head was a twisting, writhing contortion of teeth, reptilian eyes looking right back into mine, feasting on the fear that had consumed my face. Along its sides, organs writhed and slithered along its skin, dancing in entanglement. The mouth on the horror's face turned into grins, eyes fixated on me as I slowly moved backwards. It twitched and crawled slightly forwards, its head twisting and mouths wide open. There were whispers, voices coming out from all directions. One was crying, another was screaming my name exactly like my dad. Another sounded like many voices, dreamlike or something akin to people in my memory. "She's seen us. Rachel, I'm sorry. She's seen Feast. Turn her, kill her. She knows. She always knew. I'm sorry. Rachel, run. Kill her, feast on her. Run. Wait for her mother to come. It's here. Wait. Kill. Run. I'm sorry. Run. She's seen. The voices danced around in my ears. So many voices. Some sounded like my dad, others like me, like my mom, like people that I've never known. Others so malicious and alien-like. No, they were like demons from hell. It was a creation, confusedly formed, born from abomination. It knew not what it truly was, and I didn't either. So it slithered and crawled protectively around the skin, a former shell to call home. Rachel, the horror whispered, limbs outstretched towards me. Its voice now collective. It spoke with a sense of confusion, yet also longing, and with a twitch, it motioned after me. Run. My mind screamed at me and I kicked into action. Not looking back but hearing the wet sounds of the horror crawling after me, the voices still screaming and whispering. I stumbled and I barraged my way through objects strewn across the basement, running for the door and smashing it shut behind me. I couldn't even breathe or take a moment to comprehend what was happening. In a sudden movement, Josephine lunged at me, and reflexively, I swung my arm at her in defense. The scissors had impaled into her side and she was thrown across the hallway. Spike started running down from the other end and I bolted for the kitchen, desperately searching for a knife that I could use, and twisting around to me, I see Spike growling at me, slowly moving towards me. My hand kept searching behind me to feel for the knife block, grabbing the handle of whatever was lodged there. In an instant, Spike ran towards me and jumped, my hand swinging downwards as the knife stabbed into his head and I fell back against the oven. My dog. He laid flat on the kitchen floor surrounded by blood, and I didn't even have a moment to mourn him. Mourn Josephine or mourn my dad. He started twitching and growling once more, the knife shaking as his head started twisting and he convulsed along the floor. One by one, thin black legs ripped out from around the knife, and that same black ooze that I had seen come from my dad's former skin vomited out from Spike's mouth. He twisted and contorted, skin ripping along where his ribs would be, an eye poking out from the tear before being followed by more. 8 legs sprouted out of his head, spider-like in nature. Without hesitation, I raised up and I went for the oven behind me. Turning the gas on and leaving the door ajar, I grabbed my dad's lighter from atop the cabinet by the microwave, turning the machine on and leaving it open as well as I did so before I made a run for the lounge room. Only briefly did I look down the hallway. Only briefly did I catch a glimpse of what used to be my dad, walking towards me, the horror wearing a mask back inside my father's hollow skin. How long was my dad truly alive for? How long has this thing been impersonating him? I couldn't bear to think about it, I just needed it dead. I needed it to burn. I raced out of the window, glass stabbing into my feet, and I flicked the lighter, tossing it behind me. I limped down the street, just trying to run, not looking back. Always forwards, never back. I heard the loud bang of the fire engulfing my house behind me, and I never looked back. I heard this inhuman scream echoing for as far as the eye could see as the nightmares within it burned and writhed in the flame. I never looked back. At some point, I collapsed in the middle of the road, exhausted, feet bloody, and I cried, like I'd never cried before because everything up to this point had overwhelmed me. It felt like an hour of crying and just sitting there before I had realized how silent the world was around me. It didn't take long for me to realize that the street was desolate and nobody else was around. All the houses had boards on their doors and windows, and some were broken down. Cars were gone. One car had crashed into another one of the houses while another had a trail of that black ooze across the front yard. The street, once full of families and life, was now empty and littered with death. A house stood burning brightly in the cold night. A girl who had lost her whole family sat crying in the middle of the road. A storm had been raging outside, and that was what her father had been protecting her from. At some point it had gotten to him too. Maybe it had got to him before he even realized it. How long had he been her father before it started speaking and learning how to become him? I had no idea what had become of this place. I kept walking around the town trying to find answers for days. I stayed hidden. I stuck to side streets and alleys, never walking around in broad daylight. I found out quickly that the town still had internet, and I used a local cafe's computer to find information, but I came out of it with nothing. The rest of the world seemed oblivious to what was going on. I still had this lingering paranoia in my mind that maybe everywhere else had been compromised, and that these things were taking over completely, assuming us, assuming our identities and acting as if nothing happened to lure survivors in. That paranoia is always there. I don't want to believe it. Instead, I want to believe that these events only happened to this town and it hadn't hit everywhere else. I had hoped it didn't hit other places in the country, and so far it hadn't. Who knows if it would've. I kept checking the internet, but still there was nothing. This was a small town and this was a rural area. Even if all the towns up to Tamworth had been taken over, nobody would even know if word hadn't gotten out. I thought back to events that took place before the house was bared up, back when I heard the news that my mom had died. How did my dad find out about what was taking place to take action to protect us? It took her, I know it did. It wasn't an accident. She was walking around here somewhere, hibernating like Dad was, walking around in her skin just the same. Some days I hid in a public toilet, sitting there thinking, always thinking and staring outwards beyond the cubicle, beyond the wall, just like Father. I heard voices in the darkness. When you went outside, you could catch glimpses of shadows moving around town, moving skins wandering, exploring. They became aware of their surroundings like a child, learning to walk and talk for the first time. I started thinking if my mom was part of something greater like an experiment, hiding the truth all this time and my dad knew about it. I never truly found out what created them or why they were here as much as I tried finding that answer. One day, while I was in the bathroom cubicle waiting for the sun to set so I could move again, I heard a faint humming around my ear. This hum was in the tune of a whistle my mom used to do with me when I was a little girl. I still whistled it to myself when I was bored. I felt an uneasiness quell deep within hearing that around me. It sounded like it was moving in and out of my range, flying around my head. I felt a small tickle on the side of my neck and I smacked it with my hand. Laying center in the palm with a small smear of blood was a mosquito, twitching subtly as it died. The insect was bigger than one would initially believe a mosquito should be, another variety perhaps. At first, it seemed like nothing, but upon further inspection, I couldn't help looking at where its head should be. Half crushed on my hand, I made out a face that was almost human. It was uncanny. The face was white, so tiny yet so detailed, with a small set of hair wet with blood drooping half over its features. I realized then that I was staring at myself. It was my face in the body of a parasite. It was crushed, but I could tell in the humming it was making was the insect singing my song, not buzzing, just humming away. It became clear to me then that the very thing I had been searching for, the storm, that had befallen my hometown was a mosquito. However they came to be, they came to exist regardless. I'm sure there was one for each of us, for all walks of life, whether they be an animal or a human. They carried whatever horror lurked within and buried themselves deep within us, devouring us until they wore our skin like it was their own. Nobody would have seen it coming. Some would have survived if they were lucky enough to instinctively kill their mosquito, while others would have died never understanding. Somehow my parents knew and they tried to save themselves and save their family, to protect me. I wonder now if it was there that whole time chasing after me too in that house. How long had it been following me, trying to fulfill its purpose? I washed my hands, and that day, I kept looking at myself in the mirror, thinking if it had managed to infect me before I killed it, or if I had managed to save myself. I looked myself right in the eyes and I kept asking questions to ground myself in reality. Tonight I'm leaving it behind. I'll take my chances driving out there. I'm not the best learner in the world, but it's better than staying here. Before I do though, I'm going to find my mom and I'm going to tell her goodbye. If anybody's reading this, I'm sending this out so others can know if events like this start transpiring in their own home, their own town, that they know what it is and what they can do to stop it. Soon this town will come back to life and everybody will act like nothing ever happened. They'll act according to how they think they should act, and nobody would be able to tell otherwise. It'll simply be cleaned up, and covered up, if that is their intention. I don't know what they want. I never will. Whenever you hear the faint hum in the wind, whatever it means to you, however it tries to approach you, kill it. Just kill it.